Welcome to Casual Politics, Stephen Kinnock. I'm very grateful that you accept my request. Thank you very much. First, please allow me to congratulate you as your election as Member of Parliament. But as I know that you are very familiar to the political scene in Westminster, as your father was the leader of the opposition for almost 9 years. So my first question is that how are you enjoying your time so far in Parliament?
Oh, I'm enjoying it hugely. I've been a political animal for my whole life, although I'm not at all familiar with this place. I spent very little time here. I mean, we would occasionally come by to pick my father up if we were going somewhere else, but I don't know the buildings at all. And it's amazing how many people have come up to me and said, "Oh, do you know the way to this place or that place?" because they think I'm familiar with the surroundings here, and I'm not at all. I get lost 6 times a day. But having been a political animal and very interested in and engaged in the British political discourse for many, many years, it's an incredible opportunity now to be at the heart of it and to have the opportunity to shape the decisions which are so important for ordinary working people all over the country.
And how, in your opinion, that Parliament has changed since your father, Neil Kinnock, was Member of Parliament in the 70s and in the 80s?
Well, I think politics has changed enormously on a number of levels, but probably the most important one is the role of the media. I think that the introduction of 24-hour rolling news, social media, things being out on Twitter and on Facebook in the blink of an eye, has given a kind of an immediacy to politics that didn't exist when my father was still a prominent member of Parliament or indeed as leader of the opposition. My sense is that there was a little bit more time back then for reflection and for discussion, some of it not necessarily behind closed doors, but just simply not in the glare of the media spotlight. What I think we have now is a situation where politicians know that every time they say or do something, it's going to be out there on Twitter or on Facebook within seconds. And I think that probably has affected the way in which politicians think and act.
And how disappointing for you was to get elected as Member of Parliament and to see your party defeated by Conservatives?
Yes, of course, that was very tough. It's strange, it leaves you with a kind of mixed feelings. I was very, very pleased with our result in Aberavon. We worked incredibly hard. I estimate that we knocked on about 25,000 doors over the 12 months from when I got selected as the candidate in March 2014 through to the beginning of the short campaign and then through to the polling day. And we had around 9,000 conversations. So we worked incredibly hard. And we felt very pleased with the result that we got in the end in Aberavon. But of course that delight was tempered by a real sense of disappointment that we had not managed to return a Labour government. And that was a real sense of mixed feelings. I remember very clearly going back to the rugby club where a lot of my activists and supporters were waiting after the count, and it was probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we didn't quite know whether to punch the air with joy with one hand, but to feel very, very sort of sad and disappointed with the other. But the Labour Party has been through many difficult experiences. We now will rethink and we will regroup and we will relaunch, and I'm absolutely confident that we can win in 2020.
And the Labour Party did very poorly, especially in the South and Scotland. Why was that, in your opinion?
Well, for very different reasons. I think in Scotland, I think we were guilty to some extent of taking certain constituencies for granted. Too much of this concept of a safe seat. In my opinion, there's no such thing as a safe seat. And you have to work that constituency really hard. You have to be out there listening, engaging, organising in the community, helping on campaigns, being really present. I also think, of course, in Scotland there was this, there's a sense of a never-endum in Scotland. Yeah, they had the referendum, there was a result, but because we perhaps the pro-union case wasn't made on the basis of a very positive, engaging vision for the future of the United Kingdom and Scotland's role within that United Kingdom. It was a little bit more based on the fear and the what if case rather than the, well, here we are, this is where we need to go. I think that also led to people then moving over to the SNP. So I think there was a combination of circumstances in Scotland. As far as the South is concerned, overall my comment on our positioning and our campaign is that we actually had a lot of very policies that were attractive to aspirational voters, if you like, in the South, wealth creators, to the broad swathe of the population. But somehow those policies and those messages got drowned out in a lot of discussion about very important issues like 0 hours contracts, like the bedroom tax, but they somehow became the be-all and end-all of our policy offer. There was a lot of other, it was a very rich policy offer in many ways that did offer a clear hand up to those who were already doing well through freezing business rates, through what we had on stamp duty, but that tended to get drowned out in the other, in all the noise around other aspects of our manifesto. So somehow the voters in the South did not perceive us as being on their side. And as soon as you have that perception, you're lost.
And in England, voters said that Labour Party was too left-wing, and in Scotland they said that Labour Party was too right-wing. Which side are you on?
Look, the Labour Party does three things. We offer greater fairness in society. We offer stronger communities, more cohesive, a more cohesive society. And we offer aspiration. We offer all three of those elements have to be a part of our offer. I see the Labour Party's position in the British political landscape as being a little bit like a three-legged stool. Fairness, community, aspiration. And if you are not offering all three of those and demonstrating how the three connect with each other, then you're not actually giving a proper account of what it means to be Labour. So I think that the way to win in 2020 is not to try to divide the British electorate up into urban or suburban or rural or city or Scotland or London. It's to say Labour only succeeds when it reaches out to the broad swathe of the population. And we do in fact have values and policies that appeal to every, that should appeal to every British citizen. And as long as that is the case, then I think we can win. So I think, yes, we need to do some analysis of why it is we were perceived as being too right of centre in Scotland or too left of centre in the South, but actually at the end, those old right-left labels, I think we need to do away with them. And the question we need to ask is it right or wrong?
And to go beyond that.
We need to go beyond the tired old debate about Blair versus Brown, about New Labour versus Blue Labour, about Purple Labour, about, which micro community within a particular town or city we should appeal to, and somehow that we could calibrate our policies to match up with that, that each particular, that you end up then with a retail offer where you try to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You end up being not having a very clear narrative and a message. So we need to say we're about fairness, community and aspiration. We need to knit that together into an overarching narrative. Then the policies will flow from that. Let's get the narrative right, let's get the message right about what it is to be Labour, what's the point of the Labour Party. Then we can start to flesh out the policy detail.
And to have been stuck in Blair and Brown years, which was your party's case before the general election, to what extent was it damaging to its victory?
I would never trash the record of the Blair-Brown years. Look, we achieved some incredible things, lifted hundreds of thousands of young people and children and pensioners out of poverty, introduced the minimum wage, massive increase in numeracy and literacy rates, the Northern Ireland peace process, I could go on. Unfortunately, we had the catastrophe of Iraq. And it's very disappointing to me that which tended to overshadow so many of these great achievements. I think we have to put that to one side and say the Blair-Brown years did a huge amount to repair a broken country. By the time we inherited the UK from the Tories in '97, our public services were drastically suffering from underinvestment. The country was literally running on empty.
But the economy was still growing, like in 2010.
Well, it was, of course. I mean, the Tories have had the sort of disaster of the European currency debacle, and on the back of that, there was some signs that the economy was beginning to pick up, but there'd been so many years of underinvestment in our infrastructure, in our schools, so many schools with the leaky roof, so many hospitals without the adequate services, resourcing, so many roads in drastic need of repair. So, Labour had to come in, I think, and fix a lot of the serious structural problems that the Tories had left behind, and I think that in many ways we did that. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but I think we did build, and I would make no apology for the great achievements that the Blair and Brown years delivered. What we do have to do now is as I say, move on from that era and look to the future, and we don't need to discuss Blair versus Brown, new versus blue. What we need is to go back to basics, to remind people that at its heart, the Labour Party is about fairness, about building cohesive communities, and about offering aspiration to those people to the strivers, the people that are working and want to go forward. And what I think we need to do is say that we don't believe in greater equality because we're some kind of bleeding heart liberals. We actually have a very hard-headed understanding of why equality is good, and that's because it's good for the economy. A recent OECD report makes it absolutely clear that growing levels of income inequality in the UK are very bad for the economy and account for something like 4 or 5% less of GDP, less growth, because you don't have an economy that's taking everybody with it. You're having more and more people left behind. That, of course, adds to the welfare bill. It adds to working families' tax credits. The taxpayer is subsidising low pay in this country to the tune of £11 billion a year. So these things are... If you have an economic system which makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, in the end that's not a model that will work. And that's why Labour believes in greater equality. It's not because we're some kind of bleeding heart liberals. It's because we have a hard-headed understanding of what it means to build a sustainable economic growth model.
And have you decided yet that which candidate will you back?
Yes, I'm backing Mary Cray.
Mary Cray.
Yes, indeed. What I really like about Mary as a candidate is that she's lived and worked outside the UK for a number of years. She had some years in Brussels. And she's then also worked in business. She was at Cranfield School of Management, and then she was also working closely with small and medium-sized enterprises and helping them to scale up. And then she also spent 7 or 8 years as a counsellor. So she's really got that private, public sector and international background, and I think that's very important. I think we need to make sure that we have a leader that it has not only been inside this bubble.
Yes, very true.
And that, I suppose that also reflects my own background. I mean, I've lived and worked in 6 or 7 different countries and worked extensively in business as well. And I think we need somebody who can bring that pragmatism and business acumen to the job of being leader of the Labour Party.
And do you think that Labour Party should run its own campaign for the EU referendum, or should join a wider cross-party campaign?
I think that we should be careful about what we carve out for ourselves, and I think we definitely need a Labour in Europe campaign. But of course, we should also be contributing to a Britain in Europe campaign. And I think there's a lot of common ground that we have with pro-European conservatives on things like the importance of the single market, the need to finally get proper free movement of services in the UK, for example, the need to streamline the amount of bureaucracy in the European Union to make it work more quickly and more effectively. I'm very happy to share a platform with the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats or whoever or indeed the Scottish Nationalists on where they have a pro-European view where we have common ground. But I think that there are some aspects of where we see the EU going in terms of a more cohesive social Europe, in terms of the way in which we use the European Regional Development Funding, the European Social Fund. Those, I think some of the areas we have in terms of also getting more of a role for our members of the European Parliament in terms of being more closely connected to this place and getting a mandate from this place to be working in Europe. So getting a little bit more of a role for national parliaments. A number of those areas I feel are more where we as Labour would strike out on our own and would send a very clear and distinct Labour message.
And as David Cameron will go shortly to Denmark and start his renegotiations with Prime Minister, your wife, Mrs. Thorning-Schmidt, now that you've been elected as a Member of Parliament, will you play any role in those renegotiations?
No, I don't think so. Not with her, not with that conversation. Well, of course, there are elections in Denmark now on the 18th of June. So I think, in fact, the Prime Minister was supposed to be going up to see Helle, but it had to all get cancelled because she called the election. I don't think she called the election just to escape having breakfast with the Prime Minister. No, I am very committed pro-European. I truly and passionately believe that the United Kingdom's future lies within a reformed EU. I know that there are things that need to change. And there's lots of very good ideas out there about how they should be changed, but as one sage once said, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, and we must be at the table. Otherwise, the United Kingdom is just going to start disappearing from the global scene. So I'm very committed to helping the pro EU campaign, the Yes campaign for the referendum. What role I have in it is really, I don't know. I will do whatever I can to help, and I do intend to speak in the chamber on this issue, and we'll see what happens.
And my last question, I don't know that you're in a rush, do you think that if Britain decides to stay within the European Union, will it produce a clamour for another independence in Scotland?
If the UK decides to stay in,
yes.
Well, I guess then the SNP would be happy with that, wouldn't they? Because they're pro-European. I mean, the SNP are keen on the UK. I think the big challenge that a lot of people are talking about is let's imagine that the overall vote was to leave the EU, but there was a vote in Wales and Scotland to stay in the EU. Could that provoke a constitutional crisis? And I think the answer to that question is probably yes. There is a risk of that happening, but that's why it's really important that we set out a clear and positive case for remaining in the European Union. I think we need to win that referendum, but we need to win it well, and we need to win it with a very positive narrative. I think the learning from the Scottish referendum is it's not just the result, it's not just the numbers on the ballot papers, it's how you won it, and did you win it with a positive, clear case, in which case you can put the issue to bed, I think. If it's a real yes vote, If it's a sort of slightly grudging, yes, but only really because I'm afraid of the alternative, I think you could end up then again in what I would call a never-ending. Like in Scotland, where you've ended up in a bit of a never-ending, and I think the big risk in the UK is then that UKIP would begin to play the role that the SNP, UKIP in England would begin to play the role that the SNP has played in Scotland, and that I think would be very damaging for the UK, and we must ensure that that doesn't happen. So the top priority for us, I think, is to keep to be positive, to set out that clear vision, and to win it on that basis, win it on the front foot.
And we shall wait and see what will happen next.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very
Many
much.
thanks.
It was a pleasure.
Great
Thank
to meet
you.
you. Thanks, Elliot.